Alright, listen. Screw the 14-inch. Screw the M1 Max. This right here. The baseline 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro is the way to go. Like that rhyme? Okay, just roll the intro. Hey, what's going on everyone? My name is Cole Kakamis and welcome back to the channel. For just over 3 weeks now, I've been using the 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook as my daily driver, the machine that I use for content creation, computer science work, development, and gaming. Sort of, but I'll get to that later in the video. With all this said, I feel like I'm ready to share my thoughts on this device and give you guys some useful info if you are in the market for a new machine. The configuration I'm running is the baseline model with a 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 16GB of RAM, and then I just upgraded the internal storage from 512GB to a terabyte. I think that if you want to upgrade anything, the first should be storage because depending on the kind of work you do, that fills up fast. As for the CPU, I'd recommend the M1 Pro for almost everyone as it's still insanely fast and actually has a few benefits over the M1 Max. Starting at $2,500 or $2,700 for the upgraded storage, this is by no means a device for the average consumer. You should see this as an investment, rightly so, basically a tool that's going to help out your creative workflow. The M1 MacBook Air or 13-inch Pro are fantastic devices that still handle a lot of tasks at a fraction of the cost, so make sure to assess your needs and see if it's necessary to have the power of these new laptops. But with that aside, the obvious place to start is by talking about the display, as it's top notch. So yeah, the notch is there, but jokes aside, it really is something that you get used to after just a few hours of use, and honestly, it has grown on me more and more. At this point, it's just part of Apple's aesthetics, and so we might as well get used to it. It blends into the screen as the menu bar wraps around it and gets canceled out whenever you're in full screen mode. The only thing that sucks is the software doesn't yet account for the height of the notch, so depending on the aspect ratio of the video you're watching, it'll look a little off center. Even with all this, it does make sense to have because it's just essentially giving you more screen that you wouldn't otherwise have by pushing the menu bar upwards. Packed inside there is the 1080p camera, better late than never, I guess, and it has a wider aperture, so it'll be better in low light situations. Along with a built-in studio microphone array, it actually makes for a pretty decent zoom setup. It is a little disappointing that they didn't go that extra mile and add Face ID, but I'm sure we'll see that next year. For now, we just have Touch ID and the power button, which I've actually been quite impressed with. It's harder to press on than the other keys, so you're unlikely to accidentally actuate it, and it's also just been a quick way to make payments online or log into my Mac. Now, while I don't mind the notch, it's not all fun and games. There are still times where it will actually affect the user experience. If you've been on Twitter recently, I'm sure you've seen that at least a couple weeks ago, if you were to add too many items to the menu bar, it would just spill under the notch. While I personally haven't been able to replicate it just because you need an obnoxious number of items, there's still no excuse for it to be happening. At this point, you shouldn't have any issues with this as long as developers optimize their applications for these Macs. If you were to drag your mouse cursor underneath the notch, it's actually just going to disappear. Much like the iPhone, macOS just acts as if the notch isn't there, so if you take a screenshot, it looks like you're connected to an external display. But the new mini LED display is the best out there. Its thinner bezels give you a lot of screen real estate for all the work that you do on here. There's no longer the iconic MacBook Pro text in the bottom bezel, but instead being engraved underneath, which I absolutely love the look of. Not gonna lie, having it sitting on a stand with the Apple logo on one side and the text on the other would look pretty dope. The image on here is stunning with a resolution of 3456 by 2234. Everything you view on screen is super bright with its 1600 nits peak brightness for HDR content and then 1000 nits sustained. This makes watching any sort of content fantastic, especially for someone who's taking their laptop around a lot and will be in direct sunlight, i.e. in a coffee shop. In addition to this, the colors are crazy accurate and blacks are deep. This would be great for photo and video work, color correcting or grading in Premiere Pro and Final Cut, and designing in Sketch or a graphic design software like Photoshop. The quality of this display has actually made me use my external ultra-wide monitor a lot less, and so I'm really glad that I went with this larger model. The form factor is honestly perfect for me, and I've had no issues taking it on the go. Being able to edit a Final Cut timeline without feeling like I have too little space or having multiple tabs of Stack Overflow while working on a CS project is great. To expand a little on its portability, I'll admit I was a little worried at first just because it's a big device to begin with, and then with its thicker body and more rounded edges, it makes it more so. We're seeing Apple start to take some steps back in terms of their design, and honestly, I'm all for it. It is a little more chunky, weighing about 3.5 pounds, so it's not as light or portable as the 14, but I'm willing to sacrifice that for this larger screen and improved battery life. After weeks of lugging it from the desk setup to school and back, I'm completely used to it and don't mind the extra weight. Just do make sure that you have a bag that can actually carry a device of this size because it just barely fits in my in-case laptop bag. The one big problem though I've had is that because I'm quite limited with space on my desk, I can't actually have it in clamshell mode. Now this is because my current 12 South book arc stand that I've been using with my 13-inch for a while doesn't actually fit, so I need to wait for them to make a new insert for the 16-inch model. You'll notice when you have it out that the feet at the bottom are much larger and bring the laptop further up from the desk, so this helps a lot with ventilation through the exhaust at the back. Speaking of, the fans in here have actually yet to turn on, so I will credit for that, but it does tend to get a little warm. For your average day-to-day use, just writing scripts in Notion, reading emails, watching videos, this thing will be cool and dead silent. But when it's time to bring out the guns and work on more power-hungry tasks like photo and video editing, it's not unusual for it to heat up after about a half an hour or so. Now, it's definitely not a deal breaker and never gets to the point of discomfort if you're using your lap, but I'm a little disappointed with how often it happens. Working off the MacBook at the desk does have me missing my mechanical keyboard a little bit, but the Magic Keyboard on here is a huge upgrade coming from the butterfly switches on my 13-inch. They were super unreliable, felt really shallow to type on, and a couple of switches actually began to stop working like half the time toward the end of its lifespan. On these, you get a good amount of travel and feedback, and they look fantastic inset in this black anodized aluminum. This makes it much easier to see the keys with the backlights on them, but I've noticed that it picks up fingerprints a lot easier. Pretty much the second I took it out of the box, I was already seeing them pop up. One annoying thing is that they remove the keys for adjusting the backlighting brightness, so in order to change it, you'll have to go into Control Center. It's not a huge deal, but just something to note. Replacing those are the dictation and do not disturb key, which is really convenient when I just want to get to work and not be bothered by notifications. By now, I'm sure you've noticed that the touch bar has been removed, which at first I was a little bummed out, but now I'm fully on board. Having the full height media keys is an absolute lifesaver, just makes pausing music or increasing the volume a much easier process. This is a nice upgrade from previous MacBooks because their function keys were half the height and a lot harder to press on. Looking down at the trackpad, it's one of the Mac's strongest points. There's just no laptop out there that even comes close. Using it while editing has honestly been so convenient, and even with the side scroll wheel on my MX Master, it'll still make it much harder to edit on an external monitor. In addition to this, I've been super impressed by the speakers. The larger grill size on here will obviously make them sound a lot better than the 14-inch. They're not quite on par with my audio engines, but they're still so convenient to use that most of the time I have no issues listening on them. With a Pro Apple device comes ProMotion. It's really awesome to see they keep adding this to all their top-of-the-line devices. This tech is identical to what we saw on the iPhone 13 Pro models, with it adapting based on the content that's on your screen. So if you watch a 24 FPS movie or play a 60 FPS game, it'll update dynamically. This makes using the display butter smooth, whether I'm panning around a Final Cut timeline or playing with the sliders in Lightroom, it feels responsive. But once you get used to it, it makes going back to another MacBook really difficult. While this is awesome, developers do need to take advantage of this in their applications, so sometimes you will have an inconsistent experience. Most notably, Safari is not optimized, which is really surprising considering that's an Apple app on Apple hardware. So that's really weird to see. I'm not sure why after all these weeks it's still not fixed, because if you compare it Google Chrome versus Safari, it's noticeable. Where the tech really shines the most is through gaming. Now, this is definitely not a gaming device. Please do not buy this expecting to run the latest AAA titles. It's not so much that the hardware isn't capable, but rather there's so many compatibility and optimization issues when it comes to using macOS. My Steam library has recently grown to over 30 titles, but only 8 of those are actually compatible on Silicon Macs. The same can be said about the Epic Store. Only a few of the dozens I have on their work. There's no way to run Windows through Boot Camp, and you can use VMs like Parallels, but I wanted to keep these tests strictly to running natively on macOS Monterey. Loading up Life is Strange and running it at a resolution of 2560 by 1600, I was able to average around 40 FPS, so it was more than playable. If you've never played this game before and are picking up this Mac, I have no problems recommending you try it out. Although, while I was running on high settings, the graphics don't seem to be as good as they were on PC at the same settings. Also, during the cutscenes, I was having a lot of glitches where these random objects would spawn in the game and just start flying around, so it looked kind of weird. For whatever reason, it doesn't work like any other full screen app, and the notch cuts into the game. But if you put that all aside, I do think that you can still have a lot of fun with this game. Going over to Firewatch, I was stuck at a resolution of 1728 by 1117, and no matter what I changed it to, it would always just reset. With that, I was getting an average of around 35 to 40 FPS, but depending on what was going on screen, it could even hit 60 at times. At high graphics settings on here, it definitely didn't do the beauty of the game justice, but it's more than playable and definitely something that I'll be spending a little time on when I'm on the go. And the last last game I gave a try was Minecraft Java Edition. Running at full native resolution, I was able to average between 70 and 80 FPS with 12 chunks and fancy graphics enabled. This is one of the few games that actually runs really well. Granted, it is not that complex, but it's beyond playable, sometimes even hitting 100 FPS. I'm absolutely stoked that I'm able to play this game on here, and hey, if anyone wants to jump on some servers, shoot me a DM. While I obviously love to play games, recently I've been learning a little bit about how to make them in Unreal Engine. I didn't have too much time to use it on the Mac, and when I first tried it out, I had some trouble rendering the lighting properly, but now it seems to be fixed. Performance as a whole was fine, but I'll definitely be sticking to my custom rig for any real projects. There's still not a proper silicon version as it's just running off Rosetta, so at the moment, Windows really is the only option. This is definitely an app that really pushes the thermals, but still doesn't kick on the fans. Speaking more on the power of the M1 Pro chip, it has handled nearly everything I've thrown at it beautifully. Now, I don't want to claim that I have the most power-hungry workflow, but I still do edit 4K footage with multiple color grades and overlays, as well as photos, while having multiple other applications open at the same time. The first actual test I did on the Mac was with Premiere Pro, and I was surprised it did a lot better than my custom PC. For reference, it has a 2070 Super, i7 9700K, and 16 gigs of RAM. Since then, though, I've really been enjoying to use Final Cut. While there's definitely a big learning curve, it's so relieving to finally have a Mac that's capable of editing and fully taking advantage of all that hardware. While working with 4K color corrected clips, I've had no dropped frames, and the video previews start immediately when I play pause. The same could not be said about my PC. The one issue I've had, which seems to be more on the OS side of things, is that when I zoom in on the timeline, the audio waveform previews take a good second or so to load. Alongside this, I like to edit with my AirPods in and have had a lot of issues getting them to pair. The past day from when I'm recording this, they started to finally work, but over the past few weeks, I've had a lot of issues with them auto-connecting, and then when I first try to pair them, it has like Find My in the name. It's really weird. I'm not super sure what's going on with that. Other than that, the performance has been fantastic, and I've seen no issues only having 16 gigabytes of RAM, so I think for most people you're fine with that unless you really want to future-proof yourself. It seems that because it's unified memory, the difference between 16 and 32 is negligible. For the most part, I recommend saving the money and instead putting it towards increasing the internal storage, as you can never have enough, it seems. In addition to it still having great performance, the biggest reason that you should go with the M1 Pro over the M1 Max is its battery life. Don't get me wrong, the M1 Max is great, but for most people, they're not going to need that power, myself included, and it actually draws a lot more from your battery. These aren't any crazy figures, but I've had no issue lasting 5 to 6 hours screen on time with heavier workloads like video editing, and 10 to 12 hours with lighter activities like web browsing, media playback, and writing. Gaming seems to drain the battery much quicker though, as it's about 4% for every 10 minutes or so, but there's obviously a lot of different variables, and those numbers are from only 3 games that I've played. For some more battery life anecdotes, I only lost around 10% while editing B-roll for an hour and a half. When going to export an 8.5 minute 4K video, I only went down 2%. You might not be impressed by that, but just know that if you use MagSafe and the included 140 watt charging brick, you'll get fast charging of about 50% in 30 minutes. Just note that if you charge over USB-C, you're going to be capped at 96 watts. If you look more to the side, you'll see that they actually added back ports. I'm really glad to see that they're starting to be more okay with just accepting their mistakes and saying, hey, we messed up. Here you go. We get both an HDMI port and STXC card reader, which has been super convenient, not having to carry around a dongle. The main reason that I went with the current monitor I have was just I wanted the simplicity of using a USB-C cable, not needing any dongles, but now with this, it'll make searching for another monitor a lot easier because I can still use the HDMI for display, charge it with MagSafe, and have all the other ports open. The issue though is that it's not HDMI 2.1, which is really annoying for how expensive this laptop is and the fact that it has an 120Hz display in it. They also seem to have done the minimum with the SD card slot. It's been fast enough for my needs, so there's no complaints there, but while it's compatible with cards that go up to 312 megabytes per second, the port only allows 250. One problem I've been experiencing that is again due to the software is a lot of the time the SD card or other external drive just aren't showing up, so I have to keep unplugging it and putting it back in. This is definitely not great because this laptop is supposed to be for pro users, so I would have loved to see them go the extra mile with it. Another thing that would have been nice to see is a USB-A port, just because there's so many accessories that still use it. But with that all said, this is the 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Man, that is just not a good name. I want to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, that this is not a laptop for the average consumer. At the end of the day, this is a tool that will help get your work done, and so it is an investment. If you have a more demanding workflow, then I think the 16-inch M1 Pro is definitely worth the buy. Choosing this over the M1 Max and the 14-inch model will provide you with the best possible battery life and a screen that's large enough to multitask comfortably and offer great color accuracy for creative work. Only having 16 gigabytes of RAM has not been a problem at all, as the unified memory is optimized really well in macOS, so I've never felt slowed down even in 4K Final Cut timelines. While yes, you are sacrificing a little bit of portability with its size, the ability to have all this power on the go, at least for me, is a no-brainer. Seriously, a huge thank you to everyone who's made it to this point in the video. I really appreciate it. I hope that I was able to help some of you decide if this MacBook will fit your needs. Please do drop a comment if there's anything I missed or something you want to know. If you want to see more tech-related content from me in the very near future, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching, and take care.